A soft spring rain had been falling over Columbus, Georgia, for 3 days straight when Rebecca Thompson didn't come home. It wasn't the kind of rain that shouts with thunder or lightning, just a quiet, steady drizzle that soaks into the earth, turning dirt roads into thick mud and making the Chattahoochee River rise against its banks. On the evening of April 14, 2005, Rebecca had been at the Muskogee County Community Center, a small brick building on Winton Road that always smelled faintly of floor wax and old coffee. She'd spent the evening organizing donations for the annual spring clothing drive, sorting through boxes of children's jackets, laughing softly with the other volunteers about everyday things. Rebecca was 42 years old, calm and dependable, the kind of person whose presence quietly anchored a room. For nearly 2 decades, she'd worked as an administrative assistant at the regional electric company. She was the co-worker who remembered birthdays, brought snacks to meetings, and kept spare umbrellas for anyone caught in the rain. Her light brown hair, cut neatly short, was beginning to show silver at the temples. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, in pastel cardigans over sensible shoes. Rebecca Thompson was not the kind of woman who simply vanished. The meeting wrapped up around 8:45 p.m. Security footage from the center's lone outdoor camera captured Rebecca leaving at 8:52, a canvas tote over her shoulder, her pale yellow raincoat gleaming faintly in the lamplight. She moved with her usual unhurried pace toward the bike rack on the east side of the building. The video was grainy, the camera mounted too high and angled poorly, but you could see her unlocking her forest green 10-speed bicycle, one she'd owned since the late 90s. Moments later, she pedaled out of view into the rain-soaked night. She never made it home. At home, her husband, Dennis Thompson, a quality control supervisor at a local furniture plant, had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for her. When he woke around 1:15 a.m., her side of the bed was untouched. Her reading lamp was dark. Her slippers were still neatly placed by the door, exactly where she always left them. He tried calling her cell phone. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Then he called the community center. No answer. Next, he called her sister, Margaret, who lived across town near the hospital. She hadn't heard from her either. By 2 a.m., Dennis was driving the familiar route Rebecca always took home, a 3-mile stretch she'd biked hundreds of times before. Headlights cut through the fog as he scanned the sidewalks and driveways for the yellow of her raincoat or the glint of her bicycle frame. But the streets were empty, rain pooling on asphalt, porch lights flickering behind curtains, and the occasional bark of a restless dog. At 3:03 a.m., Dennis filed a missing person report at the Columbus Police Department downtown. The officer who took his statement, Sergeant Holland, a 15-year veteran, ran through the usual questions: arguments, medications, mental health, finances. Dennis said no to all of it. Rebecca was steady, happy. They'd been married for 19 years, had no children, but a good life. She volunteered, she gardened, she called her mother in Tallahassee every Sunday evening. 3 days later, a man walking his dog along Bull Creek, a narrow waterway that feeds into the Chattahoochee about 7 miles south of the community center, spotted something in the shallows. It was Rebecca's bicycle, half submerged near a concrete culvert. The green paint was unmistakable. Her canvas tote still hung from the handlebars, waterlogged but intact. Inside were a damp notebook, a crushed pack of sugar-free gum, and a sunflower keychain. But there was no sign of Rebecca. Search teams combed the surrounding woods for 2 days, joined by volunteers and cadaver dogs. They found nothing, only mud, poison ivy, and the skeletal remains of a deer long gone from the previous winter. Detective Aaron Mitchell, a seasoned investigator in his late 40s, was assigned to lead the case. He'd handled missing persons cases before, most ending within a few days. But this one felt different from the start. Something about it didn't fit. The discovery of the bicycle bothered him most. Bull Creek wasn't on any direct path between the community center and Rebecca's home. To reach that area, she would have needed to ride nearly 4 miles in the opposite direction, down Old Cuzetta Road, through back roads lined with pine forest and abandoned tobacco barns. It made no sense. Not for a rainy night, not for Rebecca. Mitchell stood at the creek that morning, watching technicians photograph the bicycle from every angle, trying to piece together a story that simply refused to make sense. Interviews with volunteers offered few clues. Everyone said the same thing. Rebecca was kind, helpful, quiet. Only one woman, Patricia Walsh, mentioned that Rebecca seemed a little distracted that night. She'd checked her watch several times and declined an invitation to stay for coffee afterward. But distracted wasn't unusual. People get distracted. Life pulls them in different directions. As the days passed, attention inevitably turned toward Dennis Thompson, as it often does in cases like this. Detective Mitchell interviewed him 4 separate times in 2 weeks. Dennis was open, cooperative, exhausted. He let investigators search their home, their cars, his work locker, even the small storage unit they rented on Victory Drive. He took a polygraph test. Results were inconclusive. Not proof of guilt, but not exoneration either. Dennis was 45, soft-spoken, with thinning brown hair and a face that always seemed weighed by worry. Even before his wife vanished, he worked long hours, kept to himself, and read old Western novels on lunch breaks. But there was no clear motive, no large insurance policy, no debt, no secret accounts. Neighbors described the Thompsons as quiet, ordinary, good people. They kept their lawn trimmed, waved hello, and never argued loudly enough for anyone to notice. The most memorable dispute anyone could recall was over whether to paint the house trim cream or white. Still, in a city of fewer than 200,000, whispers travel fast. And when someone like Rebecca Thompson disappears without a trace, those whispers grow louder with every passing day. In the weeks after Rebecca Thompson's disappearance, the investigation began to lose its rhythm. Neighbors and co-workers who had once spoken with confidence started to recall smaller, quieter details, fragments that didn't quite connect but still lingered in memory. Some told police that Rebecca hadn't seemed herself in recent months. She'd stopped attending the neighborhood book club she'd been part of for years. Her once tidy garden, once full of color and order, had grown overrun with weeds. A cashier at her local Piggly Wiggly remembered she looked thinner, her clothes looser, her groceries different. More frozen meals, fewer fresh vegetables. Detective Aaron Mitchell filled his notebook with these fragments, details that painted no clear picture, just scattered pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. By early May, the investigation had slowed to a crawl. The bicycle yielded no useful evidence, only Rebecca's own fingerprints and traces of mud that matched the creek bed. No one had seen her after she left the community center that night. Her phone records showed no strange calls or messages. Her old desktop computer contained nothing more than work files, recipes, and routine emails with her mother and sister about weather and grocery sales. After 2 exhaustive searches of Bull Creek, authorities suspended operations. The case stayed open, but it quietly slipped into the slow drift of routine follow-ups, the kind that rarely led anywhere. Behind closed doors, some investigators began to form an unspoken theory. Maybe Rebecca had left on her own. Maybe the bicycle had been planted, a decoy to make her disappearance look accidental. The logic wasn't based on evidence, but on absence. No witnesses, no struggle, no trace of violence. In the void left behind, it was easier to believe she had chosen to vanish than to face the darker alternative, that something terrible had happened under that soft Georgia rain. Rebecca's younger sister, Margaret Wilson, didn't believe that story for a second. Where Rebecca had been gentle and accommodating, Margaret was direct, even blunt. She was 40 then, a divorced nurse who worked long overnight shifts at Midtown Medical Center, washing her hands raw between patients and chain-smoking menthols on her balcony during breaks. Her dark hair was cropped into a simple bob, practical and low maintenance. When the official investigation began to cool that summer, Margaret felt it in her bones. Detective Mitchell still answered her calls, but his words had become careful, distant. He said the case was still a priority, but Margaret recognized the tone. It was the same voice doctors used when talking about terminal patients. She knew what it meant. Her sister's case was becoming a cold file before the first year had even passed. So Margaret did what she'd always done. She took matters into her own hands. She retraced Rebecca's steps from those final weeks, speaking to every person the police had already questioned, but asking new questions. She learned that Rebecca had been organizing pickup times for donations with a local church, making several calls from the community center's office. More importantly, she discovered that Rebecca had stepped outside twice that evening to take calls on her cell phone, a detail the police report had never mentioned. With help from a lawyer friend, Margaret got access to her sister's phone records. Most of the calls were ordinary: family, work, her mother in Tallahassee. But three numbers